Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the launch of the IEA's Energy Matters, how COP21 can shift the energy sector onto a low-carbon path that supports economic growth and energy access. We are joined today by several IEA experts. Kamel Ben Nasser is Director of Sustainable Energy Policy and Technology. Jean-François Gagné, Head of Energy Technology Policy Division. Takashi Hattori, Head of Environment Climate Change Unit, and Christina Hood, a Climate Policy Analyst at the IEA. Kamel will walk you through our presentation today, and then we will open it up for questions. Please note that we will be taking questions in writing. You may submit questions in writing via the interface on your computer. Kamel, the floor is yours.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you. We are 5 days away from one of the most important events in climate change, which is the COP21 happening here in Paris. And I wanted to take this opportunity to present some of the IEA findings as well as the recommendations from the agency as a result of their current work and what we are suggesting going forward. We just held last week our energy ministerial meeting, which gave a very strong support to the IEA in order to proceed with their work related to energy and climate change. On the next slide, we will go through the 4 main topics that we will cover. The first one is why energy matters, and we will see that energy is at the heart of the climate change debate. The second one is a discussion of the impact of the INDCs on the energy sector. The third one is the IEA's 4 key messages for COP21 and what they imply in terms of sustainability. And then I will conclude with the activities at COP21. And I wanted to stress that never in IEA's history has the IEA been so much involved in a COP event. So moving to the next slide, energy at the heart of the climate change. The first fact is that the energy sector accounts for 2/3 of the global greenhouse gas emissions, and therefore finding a solution to reduce the carbon intensity of the energy sector is going to be an essential part of the COP21 process. The momentum is building. We just published the CO2 emissions from fuel combustion with the IEA a few days ago, which have some very interesting findings. If we look at the statistics on emissions for 2014, we find that despite a 3% GDP growth, the emissions in 2014 did not rise, which seems to indicate that there is some level of decoupling between the economic growth, which is generally intensive in energy, with the emissions. The second point is that capacity additions in renewable have been at a record high at 130 gigawatts. This is thanks to investment in renewable, solar and wind, as well as hydro in both OECD and non-OECD countries. The third point is, as a result of a collective push to reform fossil fuel subsidy, as well as the lower oil prices, we are starting to see some results of the subsidy reforms for fossil fuels that we, along with other organizations, have been advocating as being detrimental to decarbonization effort. The fourth point is that, and this is thanks to the efforts of the UNFCCC, along with a very strong input from the French diplomacy, over 175 countries have now INDCs for COP21. This is an absolutely spectacular result of the process, and the IEA is very pleased with the outcome so far. We are saying that the energy sector must cut emissions, but we still have to face a very strong problem with energy access. Today, over 1 billion people do not have access to modern energy sources. So we want to make sure that we have the main components of a sustainable energy system as highlighted by the Millennium Development Goals of the United Nations, that would include energy access and energy security. Looking at the impact of the INDCs, there have been 150 INDCs covering 175 countries, which represent an overwhelming amount of the emissions. 95% of the energy-related emissions are covered by those 175 countries. We issued in the agency the World Energy Outlook special report, which is available freely on the IEA's website. This report has been downloaded about 70,000 times, and it has a number of recommendations and analysis related to the COP21. So this report that was published earlier this year had an initial analysis of the INDCs as the ones that have been previously submitted and our expectations. So the recommendation of the report is that we need a near tripling in the rate of global energy intensity improvement, and 70% of additional power generation needs to be low carbon, and power sector emissions needs to be plateauing at today's level. However, if we look at the projections based on the INDC submitted, we see that the emissions are still rising in 2030, so much more is needed in order to decarbonize the energy sector. So what are the messages of the IEA to the COP21? If we want to shift the energy sector into a low carbon path to support energy access and economic growth, one, we need to take 5 key actions which will be detailed in the upcoming slides. These are led by energy efficiency and renewables that would help, for the first time in history, peak and then reduce global energy emissions. The second one is using the Paris Agreement to drive short-term actions that are consistent with long-term emission goals. A third one is accelerate innovation in the energy technology sector to make decarbonization easier and even more affordable than what it is today. And finally, enhance energy security by making the energy sector more resilient to climate change impacts. So what are the 5 actions? The 5 actions have been analyzed. If we look at the trajectory of emissions based on the World Energy Outlook special report, we see that the emissions will still continue to rise to 2030. This is the blue curve shown by the INDC scenario. So that clearly not enough. What we have done is looked at a scenario that we call the bridge scenario, which would be based on using proven technologies that exist today and without jeopardizing economic growth. So this is an initial scenario, still not the one that we would like to see in a 2-degree scenario, but that is already a good start, a good starting point. So what does that scenario show on the curve is that before 2020, we will see a decline in emissions despite economic growth. So that decoupling that we started to see in 2014 is going to be much more prevalent. Where do the savings or the wedges, the difference between those two scenarios are about 5 gigatons. Those wedges, using the Princeton terminology, will come 50% from energy efficiency, and then another 9% from reducing inefficient coal in power plant, then 17% in renewable investment, then in the upstream sector, reducing methane emissions, about 15%, and finally, and last but not least, is the fossil fuel subsidy reform, which started happening over the last few years, but that needs to be accelerated. So these 5 technologies, or 5 policies actually, would help us achieve that peaking of emissions before 2020 and going into a downward trend. Again, this is not the 2-degree scenario, but this is a starting point. In terms of where these 5 wedges would apply, we see here a distribution around the world. We have flexibility across regions, and we see that, let's say, between the United States and Southeast Asia, we have a relatively similar trend, but if we compare China and United States or Russia, we would see very different trends. So every major geographical regions would have a different series of those 5 wedges. The second part of the recommendations is that we should use the Paris Agreement to drive short-term actions that are consistent with long-term emission goals. What does that mean in practice? Is that we need to lock in the vision by translating the agreed below 2 degrees temperature goal into a clear long-term emissions goal. So how do we do that? We need to link the short-term national targets to the long-term objectives. And the IEA has a very strong data analysis tools and data projection tools using advanced computer models to achieve that. The second point is that we need to establish a 5-year revision cycle to strengthen the actions as the countries experience success and technology cost decline. To give an example, we have seen over the last 5 years quite a significant decrease in PV prices, which is helping to improve the effectiveness of renewable. We are actually very happy that in the last meeting between France and China leaders, the 5-year recommendation has been pretty much put forward, as well as one of the earlier texts of the negotiations that was published, was available in October. Finally, tracking the transition, what we are advocating is that we should not limit that to only the consequences, which are the greenhouse gas levels, but we need to look at the overall transition of the energy sector. In terms of carbon budget, what we are saying is that the 5-year revision cycle would be extremely important in terms of assuring that our carbon budget is really tracked effectively and that we don't spend our carbon budget ahead of the current projections. The third point about innovation, and the energy minister meeting last week has also given an even stronger mandate for the IEA in terms of contribution to the tracking the innovation cycle. This graph here, which has been published as the IEA, in the IEA Energy Technology Perspectives, which was published in June 2015, shows how we can accelerate the innovation cycle, which is known in the energy sector to be quite long, and how those policies can help start up the process. This is the early phase part in yellow in this graph, and then during the introduction of technology, improve the deployment within countries and within the world. So what do we advocate in terms of innovation? The first part is that investment from the public sector needs to be tripled in RD&D. We also need to scale up collaboration between public and private entities in developed and developing countries. We have developed under the mandate from the G8 roadmaps from the IEA with a number of partners for clean energy technologies, and these are all available on the IEA's website. And also we are coordinating through our energy technology networks about 6,000 experts around the world through what we call the technology collaboration programs, and they used to be known as our implementing agreements. And we're also ready to support new initiatives outside of the already very extensive range of technologies covered by those technology collaboration programs. The fourth point is enhancing the energy security by improving the resilience to climate change impacts, and we have a series of works that have been published on the resilience part of the energy sector and how we can improve going forward. These are some of the considerations that have been developed for resiliency, and we are certainly looking forward to an even stronger interaction with both the financial communities, the insurance communities, and the business communities to make sure that we have a complete set of recommendations in terms of improving resilience of the energy sector. In terms of work of the agency and inputs to COP21, we have a number of publications that are highlighted there, including the Energy Matters, the resilience one that I just mentioned, complementary measures, and tracking the energy transition, in addition to several books that have been published. And I wanted to highlight the Energy Technology Perspectives that was published in June 2015, the World Energy Outlook that was published a couple of weeks ago, the CO2 emissions, which was published last week, the Renewable Energy Market Report published in October, and the Energy Efficiency Market Report that was published also last month. And the Energy Efficiency Market Report is available for free download from the IEA's website. In terms of participation of the IEA into the COP, I think that never in the IEA's history have we ever been so much involved in events. The last count is over 60 events that the IEA is participating in, and several of them have been organized for the first time of IEA's history with the COP, and all these events will be listed in our website, www.iea.org/COP21, which should be live in the next couple of days. I just wanted to highlight 3 events that the IEA is involved in among all those more than 60 events. The first one is on December 3rd, which is the IEA Day, which is a technical day of presentations where we highlight the key messages from the agency. And there will be at the end of the day a networking reception. The second one is the joint IEA-China high-level side event, which will include both China's lead negotiator and the IEA executive director. It's going to be on Friday, December the 4th. And then an IEA official side event with Asia Development Bank, where we are looking at the transformation of the energy sector. Several other events that need to be highlighted include the Lima Paris Action Agenda on Innovation, which will feature a number of very important announcements in terms of innovation, and I will let you the surprise to discover those during that particular day. So the IEA is evolving to meet the future challenges, and we have had over the last few weeks a number of very positive announcements. Last week at the ministerial, Mexico has formally requested to join the IEA. Mexico plays a very important role because it is both a very important producer, but it's also a very important member of the OECD and of the consuming economies. China and Indonesia have also formally become associates, and we have other countries that are interested in the process. We have also received from the ministers the energy security mandate to include other components than the oil, which was the raison d'etre of the agency, and now it's moving to other components of the energy mix like gas. And then the third one is that IEA is strengthened as being an international hub for clean energy technology and energy efficiency. So the statement that has been put forward and will be distributed at the COP is from the 29 member countries, and the statement reads there, it's 5 key opportunities to reduce the energy sector emissions that are listed there that have been discussed earlier. And then the call on the IEA to advise how to enhance the environmental sustainability of the energy sector, including the reduction of local pollution, expanding the tracking of the energy sector transformation, and increasing the international collaboration. And to conclude, the energy sector is a key for a very successful outcome that we are all looking forward to. The INDCs that have been submitted, which have been a record number 175, are a great step, but they are not enough to achieve our climate goal, but they are a good basis from which to build ambition. The cost-effective action is possible now using existing technology that could lead global emissions to peak around 2020. Still, that is not the optimal solution that would put us in line with the less than 2-degree scenario. The Paris Agreement must send a very strong signal to the energy sector through a long-term goal, 5-year reviews, and a strong tracking framework that would not only include the emissions, but would include a better tracking of the energy sector. Additional focus is needed on energy technology innovation, and especially on the investment from the public sector and collaboration between the public and private sector, as well as collaboration between developed and developing economies, and then on building energy sector resilience to climate impacts. Finally, the IEA stands ready with the mandate from the ministerial last week to support implementation, bringing together data, modeling, policy, and technology. Thank you very much for your attention. I'm going to leave back the floor to Greg Frost.
Thank you very much, Kamel. And thank you to those of you who have already submitted questions. Several of you have asked whether the slides will be available. We will send the slides out to you after the webinar is finished. We will also make available our brochure, which is something that Kamel referred to. It is the brochure that we are issuing for COP21 called Energy Matters. Now, we do have a couple of questions. The first comes from Alexander Ox, who says, what concrete energy sector commitments should be agreed in Paris, if any, should the negotiations lead to sector-specific targets and commitments? So we'll see which of our experts would like to take that.
Okay, now that's a very important question. The work that we have been doing with the energy technology perspectives has been building on sector collaboration. We have worked with a number of those to achieve a vision and a strategy in terms of decarbonization. This has been translated into the Energy Technology Perspectives 2015 and into a number of energy technology roadmaps that have been published. And we're actually working on a new generation of energy technology roadmaps that would support the hopefully very ambitious objectives of the COP21. So these are a very important item. I'm going to leave the word to Jean-François Gagnier, who is the head of division for the energy technology part.
Thank you very much, Kamel. And indeed, one way to look at the issue is to be able to understand what the role of each sector should be, so that we can identify opportunities in each sector and see how each of the opportunities pan out. But one of the issues with having sector-specific commitments or targets is that as the world evolves, you want to be able to gain some optimization between the different sectors depending how the picture evolves. And so that's why when we do our analysis, we do an integration exercise that not only looks in sectors in isolation, but it's very important that systems integration be at the heart of the targets that we set ourselves, so that we can see the synergies both between supply and demand, but also between the different sectors of the economies, and also are able to push forward those solutions that help create those synergies. So, for example, moving to smarter energy systems where information can be used to optimize the way we deliver not energy, but services to the population.
Thanks, Kamel. Thanks, Jean-François. Our next question comes from David Biello. David has actually submitted 3 questions. I will read the first one out. It's actually a 2-part question. What specifically do you mean by reducing inefficient coal? How can one avoid lock-in that scenario?
So today, if we look at the average efficiency of coal-fired power plants, although it's improving with the addition of the latest generation ultra-supercritical power plants, we are still far from having an overall efficient fleet of power plants. Whether these are the ones that have been built 40 or 50 years ago, that have efficiencies that are below the 30%, these ones, or even more recent ones that are also below the 30%, what we are looking forward is to have efficiencies that are above the 45% for coal-fired power plants, and have the new units replacing the older ones in a way that would be the most effective and efficient one. Right. Christina?
Yeah, in the bridge scenario, these 5 key measures, the measures work together as a package. So there is a large reduction in the rate of energy demand growth due to energy efficiency, and that reduces the need for new investment in any kind of generation. Then there is a significant boost in investment in renewable electricity generation, which fills, a large share of the generation that is needed. So the restriction, although there is still some high efficiency coal built in this scenario, and actually even in the IEA's 450 scenario there is some high efficiency coal built, it is a relatively small amount.
Thanks, Christina. We'll move on to another questioner, David Biello. I will come back to your questions if we have time a little bit later. I just want to make sure that we share the wealth. This question comes from Mafuja Parven, who writes, "Greetings. Cost-effective action is possible now that could lead global emissions to peak around 2020. Please tell us more, 2 or 3 lines, about cost-effective action that could lead these global emissions to peak around 2020.
Okay, so what we said is that we can take cost-effective actions in the sense that, one, they would not jeopardize economic growth, and second thing is that they could use existing and proven technologies in order to achieve that objectives of the peaking of emissions before 2020. These are number one, and we highlighted that in the IEA publication, the Energy Efficiency Market Report, as well as the World Energy Outlook Special Report on Climate Change about the role of energy efficiency. 50%, and this goes through both the supply and the demand sector. So that is definitely, and we are saying that energy efficiency is the first fuel in terms of magnitude. So if we manage to do that, and the 5 measures that I have referred to, which in addition to energy efficiency include the emissions from the upstream sector, the removal of energy subsidies, as well as the investment in renewables, would be quite a significant part of the reduction in emissions and peaking before 2020, with the 5th component being what we just talked about, which is the phasing out of inefficient coal-fired power plants.
Okay, the next question comes from Donato Speroni. It's actually a question that refers to the bridge scenario that you mentioned during your presentation. Donato writes, what's the difference between the bridge scenario and the 450 scenario of the World Energy Outlook?
So the bridge scenario is gets us into an intermediate trajectory between the INDC scenario and the 450 or the 2-degree scenario. It is not sufficient to achieve the deep decarbonization that would be required in the 2-degree scenario. We need, if we want to move from the bridge scenario to the 2-degree scenario, to develop new policies, to accelerate the innovation. The bridge scenario just relies on existing technologies. We need to go much beyond that to reach the 2-degree scenario.
The next, oh, sorry, did somebody want to add something? Christine?
Sure. Just one thing to add to that. To us, this highlights the importance of the 5-year review process within the Paris Agreement. In our analysis, if the bridge scenario was followed until 2025, it is still possible to get back to a 2-degree scenario from there, as long as commitments are strengthened in 2025.
I guess the main difference is that these are actions that can be taken now fairly quickly that allow us to keep the window of opportunity open while we define how to achieve those long-term goals. So that's why you have complementarity between the 4 requests that the IEA puts forward in terms of looking at short-term actions that can really help meet long-term goals. But there is a need to review those short-term targets as you get more clarity about how achievable the longer-term goals are.
Terrific. Great points. The next question comes from Neil McNaughton. Neil writes, what role does carbon capture and sequestration play in the bridge scenario?
So on the bridge scenario, the CCS, or carbon capture and storage, does not play a very strong role. If we look at the 2-degree scenario, the 450 ppm, the CCS plays a much stronger role. We estimate that about 13% of the emission abatement could be associated to the CCS in the 2-degree scenario. The bridge is very, very far from there. We have seen some progress recently, but we need between now and 2025 increase the amount of CCS, of carbon captured, by a factor of 10, and we are far from there. So to answer your question, bridge does not get us there in terms of CCS.
There is a strong correlation between the actions provided in the bridge scenario and what is needed to go beyond to meet the 2-degree scenario. One of the option mentioned by Kamel is the elimination of the most inefficient coal power generation. One of the main reasons is because it is much more cost effective to think of CCS in very high efficient coal power generation. So the bridge truly is a preparation for what is needed in the long term. And again, the difference between the two is being able to have technologies that exist today play as much of a role as they can in the early stage while we prepare new technologies that can then take over and get us all the way down to a 2 degrees pathway.
Thanks. Since CCS seems to be very popular, I'm going to combine a couple of questions on CCS right now. There's one from David Biello who asked, do we still need CCS, and if so, how can that be accelerated? And then there's another person who has asked about CCS. It's Miguel Aylwin, who writes, is the carbon capture, sequestration, and storage a sufficient mature technology to be considered as an alternative of energy technology innovation?
So, yeah, these two questions are very close. In terms of whether we need or not CCS, is like many of the components of the decarbonization wedges. We could look at scenarios where we would remove one of them, and we have done that through the energy technology perspective analysis. And what it shows is that, yes, we can go to a 2-degree scenario, but in terms of cost, the cost could be significantly higher if we didn't have that option available for decarbonization. So our recommendation is that we need to have a balanced portfolio to achieve the least expensive solution for decarbonization. And certainly CCS with the 13% abatement represent the third largest components of the decarbonization. First one being energy efficiency, second one being the renewable, and then third one being CCS. So we should absolutely have CCS as part of our portfolio of solutions. Now, in terms of maturity of the technology, CCS has a number of components from both the capture and the storage and monitoring and verification side. I would say that given the level of knowledge in the oil and gas sector, the storage technologies are much better known in terms of technology cost and cycle. In the capture part, there are significant opportunity for cost reduction, which we should capitalize on, especially that in the overall cost of CCS, the major component today is in the capture part. So through deployment, we are looking forward to a decrease in cost, which would put us at costs around $30 in the future, which would be competitive with other parts of the technology portfolio.
One thing that, to answer the second question in terms of is CCS a replacement for energy technology innovation? In fact, energy technology innovation is needed to bring CCS to where it needs to be to become a solution. And as Kamal mentioned, what we are learning now with the early stage deployment and demonstration projects is really helpful in terms of making the technology more performing, reducing costs. Some of the early stage projects that have been going on, such as the Boundary Dam project in Canada, have made learnings that make the promoters say they could do the same projects with 30% less cost. So we are on a learning path, and that's why we need to entice more of that research and development, because as Kamal said, CCS is definitely a part of a balanced portfolio. And one thing that needs to be understood is that while we talk about different technologies at a global scale, the way these technologies are used in different regions vary greatly. And so certain technologies have a much higher role to play in certain regions. And that's why it's important that at a global scale, we have a very balanced portfolio.
Our next question comes from Rachel Parks. Rachel writes, what role does gas have to play in the bridge scenario, and do you see it playing a major role if and when fossil fuel subsidies are phased out?
So we consider that gas is a much cleaner fossil option compared to coal and oil. For the same unit of energy generated, gas allows a reduction by a factor of 2 of the emissions. So it provides a continuous option for the electricity generation. The other part is that if we look at the generation of gas-fired combined cycle, we get very high efficiency levels. So gas provides an interesting alternative within the portfolio of fossil fuels, and the fuel switching would certainly help in terms of moving away from the high level of emissions. We think that with the progress that has been done, has been made in terms of the development of unconventional gas resources, we have potential access to very large quantities of natural gas, and we have published the golden rules for a sustainable development of these unconventional gas resources. So to answer your question, gas will still be one of the preferred ways of reducing the carbon intensity of the energy sector compared to the traditional fossil fuel portfolio. And this is also why the IEA has put an emphasis on gas security, and this has been strengthened by the ministerial mandate on gas security. What we want to make sure is that we raise the profile of gas in the international scene to the same level or even higher level than the oil security. I'm going to pass it to Jean-François.
Yes, because so gas, the question was gas in the bridge, and I think gas actually has a role to play in all 5 measures. You know, under energy efficiency, new gas power generation comes in at much higher efficiency, and so it does play a role there. As Kamel mentioned, as a coal displacement option, it helps shut down some of the more inefficient coal-fired power plant. What shouldn't be forgotten is that in terms of integrating more variable renewables in the energy mix, gas also has a very important role to play as a balancing mechanism. And so that's why we're also working very closely with many of the regulating bodies to make sure that there are mechanisms in markets to be able to pay the role that gas can play as a flexibility mechanism to introduce more renewables in electricity generation systems. And then, you know, one thing that we've mentioned a few times is the role that the gas industry has to play in terms of reducing its upstream methane emissions, as this is one of the key parts of the bridge strategy. So gas definitely remains a major part of the energy portfolio as we see things moving forward.
So the next question touches on something that, Kamel, you mentioned during the presentation, particularly as it relates to the IEA's mandates. This question is, can you elaborate, I'm sorry, it comes from Julien Cattel. Can you elaborate on how does the IEA intend to actively support innovation and some technologies in particular? Do you plan to label some technologies you consider of interest?
So innovation was at the heart of the ministerial meeting that was held last week. Many people are not aware of the 40 years of experience of the IEA in the energy technology. We have, over the last 4 decades, developed an impressive number of technology collaboration programs. What we want to do on those technology collaboration programs is use them as vehicles to expand their reach in terms of countries, expand their reach in terms of businesses, and also provide a way of bridging between developed and developing economies. So these are the 3 principal objectives, and what we are seeing with great pleasure is that there are a number of multilateral initiatives related to innovation, and we are working with all of them through either the G7, the G20, or other initiatives to make sure that we optimize the synergies between those different initiatives, with IEA being at the heart of those initiatives. So yes, IEA can help very much on the innovation process, and we have the track record in doing it.
I would say that the IEA support activities on technology are based on three different pillars. The first one is analyzing how technology is evolving and then what the role that these technologies can play in meeting energy policy objectives. And Kamal's already talked about the energy technology perspectives work as well as the tracking clean energy progress work that is done at the IEA. We then, from that overall vision, produce technology roadmaps that really detail what needs to happen for these visions to be enacted. And then, as was mentioned by Kamal, we support the technology collaboration programs that bring together scientists, researchers, industry, and governments in identifying what are the barriers to the rollout of the technologies and how people can work together to overcome these barriers. So we really go from the setting the vision to be able to identify what the pathway should be down to the implementation of some of the solutions. And we work very conscientiously with many other bodies in that energy sphere to try to bring synergies between the different activities that are being done, both in countries but also through other multilateral initiatives.
We have quite a few questions to run through. I'm not sure we're going to get to all of them because we have to end by 4 o'clock our time. But we'll see what we can do here. The next question comes from William Brent. William writes, how do you see the role of decentralized renewables in achieving universal energy access versus traditional grid and transmission and distribution?
I think the role is not necessarily a versus, but it's more a synergetic aspect, because energy access issues are not only in remote areas. There are energy access issues that just come from a lack of reliable and well-established infrastructure. There are those issues that do rely on remote, and what we do believe is that in the long term, the most cost-effective way to provide energy is still through an interconnected system. In fact, we discuss energy systems as interconnections between different vectors linking electricity, heat, gas, and multiple energy carriers. But decentralized systems are definitely emerging, and we think it's a mix of decentralized and centralized aspects that will bring the most cost-effective way of delivering energy services. We can use microgrids and smaller systems as a way to start energy access and then build the infrastructure in a stepwise way that allows you to benefit from the cost effectiveness of larger integrated systems.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question. This one will come from Bob Kerr. Bob writes, does the bridge scenario incorporate 20-year impacts for methane as opposed to 100-year impacts, especially in consideration of gas as an alternative?
So if I understand the question about the 20 versus 100 years, what we look in all our scenarios are consistent in the way we treat the different types of greenhouse gas emissions. Whether they are methane versus CO2 versus N2Os or SOxs, they're all consistent. So we don't treat the emissions in the bridge in a different way that we treat it in the 450 scenario. So you can rest assured that we have a very similar analysis throughout all our modeling tools, whether they are in the World Energy Outlook or the ETP energy technology perspectives.
Yeah, just to confirm, we do use the 100-year global warming potential that's used in the UNFCCC process. I mean, I think the question is getting to the fact that different gases have different impacts over different timeframes, and that's absolutely true. You can have a very big short-term impact on warming by addressing these non-CO2 gases like methane. However, if we want to get to decarbonisation over the long term, we need to really tackle CO2, and we need to be taking steps today in terms of investment and avoiding lock-in to make sure that those assets are fit for a low-carbon future. So it's a case of balancing actions across the different gases and the different timeframes.
So we are, in that context, we are very pleased with the announcement made by a number of oil and gas companies in terms of supporting the COP process, and this would certainly help in achieving some of the requirements in the bridge scenario.
Thanks very much. As I mentioned, several of you have asked us questions that we weren't able to get to during the course of this webinar. Will it be possible for us to follow up with some answers to people? We'll try our best to try to answer these questions by email for those of you who are still waiting for answers. Thank you very much for joining us today. That concludes our webinar, and we look forward to a successful COP.